Hello everyone, it's Scott. We're back for day 7 of Duskmourn House of Horror spoiler season, and we got just a few cards to talk about from the weekend. But before we do, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Duskmourn House of Horror spoiler season and beyond. So our first card is the Tale of Tamiyo for 2 and a blue mana. You get a saga, and as the saga enters, and after your draw step, add a lore counter, sacrifice after Chapter 4. So on Chapter 1, 2, and 3, you mill 2 cards. If 2 cards that share a card type were milled this way, draw a card, repeat this process. So potentially you've got the ability, you're going to mill at least 6 cards, potentially a few more, and get some added draw there as well. And then on Chapter 4, exile any number of instant sorcery and or Tamiyo Planeswalker cards from your graveyard, copy them. You may cast any number of the copies. So you get to cast the copies on Chapter 4. So I think there is a place potentially in the right style of deck for this in Standard. But the question is, I think right now, is there a deck that really wants this kind of ability? If we have one, then I think this has got a chance to see some Standard play. Certainly that ability to mill things into your graveyard with Tamiyo. If you are trying to do that naturally, this is an easy way to accomplish that. So I think given the right deck construction, this has got a place in Standard. Next, we've got Nashi, Searcher in the Dark for a blue and a black mana. You get a legendary creature that's a rat ninja wizard and is a 2/2 with menace. And whenever Nashi, Searcher in the Dark, deals combat damage to a player, mill that many cards. You may put any number of legendary and or enchantment cards from among them into your hand. If you didn't put any cards in your hand this way, put a +1/+1 counter on Nashi. So I think Nashi actually has a really good chance of seeing some Standard play. Because he's got menace, it's likely that you're going to be able to get in at least 1 or 2 hits with Nashi. And I think if you're playing it in a deck that isn't really playing legendary creatures or enchantments, that adding that +1/+1 counter every turn actually I think is good enough for Nashi to see some Standard play in the right Dimir build in Standard. And he also has the ninja card type for a creature type here, and I think that's actually important because we know with Kaido from this set, there is that ability to give +1/+1 to ninjas. So if Kaido sees play, I think Nashi and Kaido would see play together. Next, we've got lower rarity cards from the day that I want to talk about. First is Fear of Falling. For 3 and 2 blue mana, you get an enchantment creature. That's a nightmare. It has flying and is a 4/4. And whenever Fear of Falling attacks, target creature defending player controls gets -2 and loses flying until end of turn. So I think, in Limited, this is a very good card, a card I definitely want to play. Not really Standard playable, but Limited, it's a quality card that I want to include in my deck. Next, we got Appendage Amalgam for 2 and a black mana. You get a horror. That's an enchantment creature. It is a 3/2 with flash, and whenever Appendage Amalgam attacks, you get to surveil 1. The reason I think this card is interesting and worth bringing up here is we don't really see flash very often on black cards. So because it has flash, certainly in Limited, it's going to be a good card because you can flash this in and use it as a surprise blocker. But even in Standard, maybe there's an outside chance of it seeing play because in a black deck we really don't get those kind of abilities very often. So being able to flash this in at the end of your opponent's turn and immediately turn around and attack with them the next turn might be good enough to see some Standard play. Next, we've got a couple of red cards. The first is Fear of Being Hunted for 1 and 2 red mana. You get an enchantment creature. That's a nightmare. It's a 4/2 with haste, and Fear of Being Hunted must be blocked if able. So very important ability here on Fear of Being Hunted, because your opponent is going to be required to block here. So in Limited, I think this is a great way of getting damage through with other creatures because you're going to force your opponent to block, and it may not be a healthy block for your opponent. And also, the fact that it has haste, so this can be a surprise situation and require your opponent to maybe block with a creature they really don't want to block with. So because of that, I think it's got an outside chance of seeing some standard play, and certainly is a quality limited card. Next is Vengeful Possession for 2 and a red mana. We get a sorcery and you gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste until end of turn, and you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So this is our normal, red steal a creature from the other side spell and attack with it. But we also get the advantage of being able to discard and then draw if we do that, and that might make this a little bit more playable in decks that want to play this ability. And certainly, again, it's another good limited card. Alright, moving on to green, we've got House Cartographer for 1 and a green mana. You get a human Scout Survivor, that's a 2/2 with survival, and at the beginning of your second main phase, if House Cartographer is tapped, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I think this actually does have some standard playability, because every time you start your second main phase, as long as House Cartographer is tapped, you get to ramp yourself, because you're going to get a land every turn that occurs. So either with Convoke or some other kind of ability, I think this is a card that might be sneaky good in standard, where we're ramping up our ability to get to where we want to be, and hopefully win the game by being able to ramp into some really big things. Next, we've got Under the Skin for 2 and a green mana. You got a sorcery with Manifest Dread, and look at the top 2 cards of your libraries. Put one of them on the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other into your graveyard. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card, and you may return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So maybe you're doing this to get a creature that has died in combat, get it back. And also on top of that, you get that 2/2. So I think this has got, again, that in limited, definitely a card I'd want to play. In standard, I think it's got an outside shot of seeing some play. Next, we've got some multicolored spells for the day, and the first is Baseball Bat for a green and a white mana. You get a artifact, that's an equipment, and when Baseball Bat enters, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever equipped creature attacks, tap up to 1 target creature and equip it for 3. So I actually like this one quite a bit, because it's going to come in, it's going to attach itself to something, and then if that creature can immediately attack, then you're going to be able to tap down the best blocker on your opponent's side and hopefully get through a little bit more damage. And I like that in standard, that ability to kind of do something to your opponent that helps push your win condition. And I think if we can get this on something that has the right abilities in addition to that, then I think this is going to be something that has some standard playability. Next, we've got Writ of the Moth for 1, a white and 2 black mana. You get a sorcery, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it, and flash it back for 3, 2 white, and a black. So powerful sorcery, you get to pull a card out of your graveyard. So any of our mill style decks, or decks that would be milling cards into their graveyard and then pulling them out of their graveyard, I think this is a great spell for that, because it only costs 4 mana. A lot of times the ones that cost 4 or less are going to be giving you a limitation on the mana cost of that spell, but this one doesn't. So I think you can do this, maybe even with an Atraxa or something like that. You get Atraxa into your graveyard, and then you use Writ of the Moth to go ahead and back onto the battlefield, and and hopefully win the game at that point. Next, we got our last cards of the day. The first is Wildfire Wickerfolk for a green and a red mana. You get an artifact creature, that's a Scarecrow, and is a 3/2 with haste. It also has Delirium, and Wildfire Wickerfolk gets +1/+1 and has trample as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So I think in limited, a very powerful card that I would play, but I don't really see an application for it in standard given the current Gruul decks that we're seeing. Next we got Oblivious Bookworm for a green and a blue mana. You get a human wizard, that's a 2/3, and at the beginning of your end step, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card unless a permanent entered the battlefield face down under your control this turn, or you turned a permanent face up this turn. So this goes really well with our Manifest Dread ability and also our Disguise ability from Murders at Karloff Manor. So if there's a deck in green and blue that is strong enough to use those abilities, then this is an obvious inclusion in that style of deck. Alright, all for today, and I'll pick up tomorrow with when we get more previews from Duskmourn House of Horrors, and I put the links to day 5 and day 6 here for you, so you can go ahead and take a look at the other preview videos from the set. Thanks for staying to the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Duskmourn House of Horror spoiler season. Thanks. I'll see you next time.